Good afternoon. We're going to begin now. I want to start by thanking you. I want to begin by thanking you for being here. I realize you're all busy people with lots of important things to do, and that you decided to be in Fort Worth and here right now. We really appreciate that. We appreciate your commitment to liberty and freedom, and we hope this panel will give you some interesting information that will help you defend freedom and fight for it. So that we don't take up a lot of time, one matter of housekeeping. This gentleman over here is walking around with a glass fishbowl. He's collecting business cards. So continue to, if you haven't already done so, give him your business cards. And then I'd like to introduce our panel very quickly, because we're on a tight schedule. I don't want to waste a lot of time. Our first speaker will be Travis Corson. He is the Director of Communications at Frontiers of Freedom, my colleague, and I think you'll hear some very interesting and important things, very Reagan-esque. And then we have Tom Giovanetti, who is the President of the Institute for Policy Innovation. And again, Tom will have some very interesting information about how we can deal with protecting American interests in a digital way. And then I will conclude, again, I'm George Landreth, I'm the President of Frontiers of Freedom, and I'll be discussing how the government wants to use your tax dollars to fund more boondoggles like Solyndra. And with that, I will abandon the microphone to Travis.
Thank you very much, George. So I'm here today to talk to you about missile defense. I think we've seen a lot of the news recently about airborne missile threats, and it's clear to say that these threats are continuing to grow around the world. The Washington Times reported yesterday that Russian strategic nuclear bombers have conducted at least 16 incursions into U.S. air defense zones in the last 10 days alone. And the U.S. government has alleged that Russia violated a 1987 nuclear weapons treaty. Last year, the Defense Intelligence Agency assessed with moderate confidence that the North Korean government currently has nuclear weapons capable of delivery by ballistic missiles. Its most advanced missile can hit a target up to 6,200 miles away, which is enough to hit, if you look at that graphic, Alaska, as well as parts of Hawaii and parts of the western United States. And with some modifications, it could possess a range up to 9,300 miles, sufficient to strike all of North America. Syrian Scuds threaten our NATO allies in Turkey, and ISIS is parading these weapons in the street. The Missile Defense Agency estimates the number of hostile missiles will grow from 6,300 today to 8,000 by 2020, which is a 30% increase, and will be more sophisticated in range and scope. Simply put, the world remains a dangerous place, and at a time when Americans seem increasingly opposed to the use of force overseas, we must instead be sure we possess the means to defend ourselves. In this time of increasing missile threats, it is critical that we continue to invest and modernize a proven and layered missile defense system that is crucial to defending the homeland. Let me take a moment to walk you through some of those key components. The first is the ground-based mid-course defense system, and it is the United States' only protection against long-range ballistic missile threats. It takes out its enemies by using an exo-atmospheric kill vehicle, or EKV, which basically uses the energy to destroy it. It's like hitting a bullet with a bullet. See here. We're frozen. Well, hopefully it'll change. So GMD was rushed to production in the early 2000s in response to some immediate threats, and at a time had some difficulty getting off the ground, but has since proven itself. Despite a number of successful flights, including one in June, GMD is still fending off attacks from skeptics. Where were we here? Despite a number, many want to scrap the current system in favor of a new one that will not be available for another 8 to 10 years, wasting billions of dollars and countless man hours already invested in the current system, leaving us vulnerable to long-range missile attack. Instead of scrapping the system, we should continue to improve and re-engineer what already exists. The Missile Defense Agency has pledged $700 million for the program over the next 5 years, and we must ensure those programs are funded to preserve our national security. Merely having the ability and the means to shoot down enemy missiles is not enough. We must also be able to see where they are. If we can get the next slide up. Guess we're having an issue with the slides. It's the Army-Navy Transportable Radar Surveillance, or the TPY-2, and it's a highly capable radar that can search for, locate, and discriminate between real risks and benign objects. They are so powerful they can detect, track, and distinguish objects smaller than a basketball from more than 1,000 miles away. These radars are forward-based to scan the horizon for danger and attacks, protecting our troops and the homeland. When there's an imminent threat, the TP2 can be paired with a rapidly deployable THAAD radar, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Battery, which can actively counter enemy missiles. This happened last year when North Korea missiles were threatening our territory in Guam. Unfortunately, due to budget cuts and the promise of a second radar, which never materialized due to higher costs and mixed results, we have only funded 12 of these 18 radars that are necessary to defend the homeland. The TP2 was deemed to be the most cost-effective and operationally capable radar for this service. At a time of budgetary constraints, we should send good money to good systems. Other systems, such as the Patriot missile, have a long legacy of defending America and her allies. Since the first Gulf War, the Patriot missile has played a crucial role in defending our soldiers and allies. Were we able to get the slides back? No, not yet. Okay. It is modular and highly mobile. A battery-sized element can be deployed in less than an hour. When the worsening Syria crisis threatened our allies in Turkey, we were able to help quickly deploy a credible defense. The Patriot missile is also shifting the burden of missile defense. For years, Europe chose to continually divert funding away from missile defense programs, forcing the U.S. to carry the majority of the burden. Recently, though, allies have been pouring more of their own resources into missile defense and are increasingly partnering with America to protect themselves against attack. The Patriot missile is now the choice for 11 American allies worldwide, including 4 in the Middle East, 4 in Europe. The burden-sharing mechanism not only brings more nations to the table, but this cost-sharing model makes it more affordable for all partners, keeping us ahead of the curve without breaking the bank. Therefore, we should finish the necessary upgrades to the Patriot missile. It will not only keep this proven system in place through at least 2048, it will also keep the cost to the American taxpayer down, encouraging our NATO allies to maintain some proverbial skin in the missile defense game. I point these systems out not because they are only cost-effective, but because they have a proven track record. GMD, despite being rushed into production, is 4 for 7 in tests. The Patriot is 21 for 25, and the THAAD battery is 11 for 11. Missile defense will never be 100%, but it doesn't have to be in order to be successful. As long as we can inject considerable doubt into the mind of our adversaries regarding the effectiveness of their attack versus our response, these systems are working. This is why we must make funding for a layered missile defense that can combat increasing threats from hostile nations a priority. However, at a time when continued investment and commitment are most crucial, these systems have been contending with a turbulent political environment and budget uncertainty. Immediate action items that would help increase our safety from missile threats include providing the $700 million in funding for GMD over the next 5 years, funding all 18 of those TP2 radars I mentioned that help us track those threats and scan the horizon, providing the full $1 billion necessary to upgrade those Patriot missiles and keep them in service for another 30+ years, building more interceptors to respond to the increasing missile threats, which are growing, as I had mentioned, and increasing funding for missile defense modernization overall. The costs would be too high to allow a world in which dictators and oligarchs are allowed to threaten Americans in their own backyards. We are not safer, and the world is not more secure if America cannot properly defend itself from growing threats. With your help, we can finish constructing the missile defense shield that President Reagan envisioned when he called upon the scientific community to turn their great talents now to the cause of mankind and world peace, to give us the means of rendering these nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Tom Giovanetti. I'm the president of the Institute for Policy Innovation, and we're based in Dallas, just about 30 miles east of here. So I'll extend my own personal welcome to Texas for those of you who are not from Texas. And I want to thank the Frontiers of Freedom for inviting me to be part of their panel. The only plug I'll give my organization is that we have a really cool mobile app that you might like to download. You can get it at m.ipi.org. m.ipi.org. So I want to talk to you about another threat. You've heard of the expression, the thin blue line, right? To describe the way that law enforcement and police are able to help keep order. We don't have a police state, but yet we have order because of the rule of law and law enforcement. And so we have this expression, the thin blue line, that has come to represent that. Well, you know, in a sense, there's also, since World War II, been a thin red, white, and blue line that has run throughout the globe, that has helped to keep order, that's helped to keep the barbarians at bay. Now, there are places where the thin red, white, and blue line was really obvious, where we had military bases and where we had troops. There are other places where you could barely see it, but everyone knew it was there. And since World War II, the United States created the peace, we safeguarded the peace, and then we shared the peace with the world. Well, I want to talk to you about another thing that the United States created, that we safeguarded, and that we freely shared with the world, and that's the internet. And the very same thing is going on today with the internet that is going on the global defense scale. We have a president who truly in his heart believes that when the United States leads, bad things happen. We have a president who does not believe in U.S. leadership in the world. And so what do? We lead from behind, or we don't lead at all, or as happened yesterday, sometimes we are shamed into taking action that we should take. But we have a president that's very uncomfortable with U.S. leadership and U.S. domination. And so in March of this year, the Obama administration announced that the United States is going to put an end to our accountability for some of the core internet functions. Over time, there's an organization called ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. And it's based in the United States. It's subject to U.S. law. It's a private company. It's what's called a multi-stakeholder organization. And the plan of the Obama administration is to completely turn over accountability and control of what are called the Internet root zone functions to this organization, ICANN. Now, why are we doing that? We're doing that for a couple of reasons. We're doing it, number one, because some of the nations of the world have been very, very vocal and very, very unhappy about the fact that the United States has played this role with the internet. Now, if you think about the way the internet operates, it's not like the United States has been some sort of empire on the internet. It's not like we have used the internet for propaganda purposes or anything like that. We've had a very, very beneficent stewardship of the internet. Like I said earlier, we've shared it with the world. People all over the globe are benefiting from the internet, not just from a freedom of speech standpoint, but from an e-commerce standpoint and a business standpoint. Think of the way the internet has been beneficial to freedom fighters and activists around the world in finding each other and organizing. Think of the ways that totalitarian countries like China has had to work very hard to try to block access of their people to the internet, things like Twitter and things like that. So the U.S. has had a very beneficent stewardship of the internet. In fact, the president of ICANN himself said last February, he used the word superb. He said the United States has done a superb job of safeguarding the internet. So the question then arrives, so what's the compelling reason for us to surrender this stewardship? And like I said, there's two reasons. One is there's some very bad countries in the world that have been complaining about this for a long time. Russia, China, you know, it's like the usual suspects, right? Russia, China, Iran, places like that. But also some of our friends in South America, Brazil and Argentina, our friends on the Indian subcontinent have complained about the United States still retaining this role of accountability over the way the internet functions. So our president, our administration has decided to give this away. So the question then becomes, okay, so if the United States is not exercising accountability and stewardship over these functions, then to whom will this ICANN organization be accountable? And so far, ICANN's answer is, we will be accountable to ourselves. Well, that doesn't fit any definition of accountability that I've ever heard of before. Now, the United States government will tell you we are not surrendering control of the internet to the United Nations. They'll go out of their way to tell you that they're not doing that. They're right. They're not surrendering control of the internet to the UN. Yet. They're not doing it now. The question is this the last step that prevents that from happening at some point in the future? As recently as December of 2012, a UN organization called the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, had a meeting, and the countries of the world voted, and a majority of countries of the world voted in favor of a treaty that would give the UN control of these functions. Now, the United States and our allies voted against it, so it really is meaningless at this point, but we were in the minority. So it's clear evidence that the majority of the countries in the world would like to see this final bit of control over the functions of the internet severed from the United States. And we all know why they want to do that. They want to be able to change the way the internet works, to make it easier for them to filter, to make it easier for them to restrict certain kinds of websites, to make it easier for them to restrict free speech, and especially political speech. And of course, this would put an end to the internet as we know it today. Now, here's the problem with the United Nations. When my friends at ICANN tell me, look, we have no interest in turning over these functions to the United Nations. The problem is we have a long history of this happening. Let me tell you about a few organizations that were set up exactly like ICANN. They were set up to perform a very highly technical function. They were set up as independent organizations, but within a few years they became absorbed into the UN system. There's an organization called the World Meteorological Association. This has to do with weather forecasting and weather radars, okay? This organization was set up in 1949. 3 years later, in 1951, it became part of the UN system. Now, why does the United Nations need to have anything to do with weather forecasting? There's an organization called WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization. It was set up in 1967. To be an independent organization. You've never heard of these organizations, and that's because they were set up to perform obscure, highly technical functions, just like ICANN. WIPO was started in 1967. By 1974, it was part of the UN system, just 7 years later. There's an organization I mentioned earlier called the International Telecommunications Union, set up to administer treaties, set up to do highly technical functions. It was set up in 1932. In 1947, it became part of the United Nations. There's an organization called the Food and Agricultural Organization, FAO. It was started in 1943. 2 years later, in 1945, it became part of the United Nations system. The United Nations system today consists of more than 20 of these specialty organizations that perform specialty functions. They perform functions that have nothing to do with the United Nations. But they get sucked into the United Nations the way things get sucked into a black hole, because there are countries in this world who do not share our values, and their plan is to use the United Nations to trump the United States. It is their plan to have all of these organizations become part of the UN global governance system, so that the United States can no longer be that thin red, white, and blue line that maintains a beneficent order on the internet, just as we have maintained a beneficent order in national defense and in world affairs. Now, there are 3 Republican congressmen who have sponsored legislation that would either slow this down or stop it. It's probably no surprise to you that they're Republicans, although the truth of the matter is there's no reason why this is a partisan issue. There is no reason. I mean, don't Democrats believe in free speech? Don't Democrats believe in a free and open internet? Shouldn't they also be in favor of this? Is anybody out here from Wisconsin? Anybody? We should have people from Wisconsin. Representative Sean Duffy has sponsored a bill that puts an absolute ban on the Obama administration transferring these functions. Representative Shimkus of Illinois and Representative Kelly of Pennsylvania have also sponsored bills that would slow it down, that would give Congress an oversight role in this transition. Of course, we have an administration that doesn't believe Congress has an oversight role in anything, right? This administration thinks Congress is like a footnote in the Constitution rather than the people's house and where legislation is supposed to come from. So the Obama administration is asserting an absolute right to do this transfer and says that Congress has nothing to say about it. Now, the problem, of course, in our current political situation is that what good does it do for the House of Representatives to pass a bill that says the Obama administration can't give away the internet? Because that bill won't pass. Harry Reid won't let it pass the Senate. So this issue, this extremely important issue, teeters on the edge of so many other important issues that we're talking about here this weekend. It depends on our taking control of the Senate so that we can actually put a piece of legislation on the president's desk. You understand that Harry Reid has been sheltering President Obama from having to deal with anything. No controversial bill ever gets to the White House to be signed because Harry Reid kills it. So what we need to do is redouble and retriple our efforts to make sure that we take control of the Senate so that one of these bills that tells the White House, no, you cannot simply unilaterally disarm on the internet and put it on a path that will eventually lead to the United Nations control, and put that bill on the president's desk and put him in a position where he has to either sign it or veto it. Like I said earlier to start off, this issue of safeguarding the internet, this issue of making sure the internet remains a place that is free and open and available to people all over the world, this is part of the thin red, white, and blue line. This is part of the beneficent job that the United States has done in the post-war era. It's a terrible mistake that we're doing as a country in walking away from these responsibilities, both in the Middle East, both around the world, but also on the internet. So the internet as we know it is in danger. It's in danger from this administration giving away final accountability. And so we as a conservative and free market and libertarian and constitutional, whatever label you embrace, we need to adopt this as an issue that we are not in favor of putting the internet in the hands of the globalists. Thanks very much.
First of all, I just want to say thanks to both Travis and Tom. I think you will see that, what Tom was talking about, most of you go to websites that if Vladimir Putin has a vote, or if the folks in Iran have a vote as to how it's administered, that website won't be around. So whether it's Tom's website or my website or Heritage Actions, we'd all be deemed offensive. So that gives you an example why that's important. And of course, explaining why Ronald Reagan's vision of missile defense makes sense and is important is obvious. I want to spend a little bit of time on and I think what is an interesting issue, and it has to do with energy. And so often the left uses the issue of energy to control and on some level dominate and mess up the economy. It's a way for them, and invariably the way they do it is this. They say, the world is going to end tomorrow if we don't get this under control. And you want to leave a nice world for your children. So if you'll give us your freedom and your money, we will prevent the sky from falling. And and they use that on over and over again in slightly different variations. But anyhow, the issue I wanted to address today is about wind energy, and specifically Cape Wind. But most everything I'll say about Cape Wind will apply to many of the wind energy projects in general. Now, just so you know, it really is a Solyndra-type boondoggle. But to be specific, it's a proposed wind farm in Nantucket Sound, 300 130 foreign manufactured wind turbines. Each of them is 440 feet tall. That's 45-story building. And you'll see the one picture here is the picture of one that has caught fire. They produce energy at a cost of approximately 3 times the cost of normal energy. Now, just to put in perspective, here's a picture of one. If you can see, there are actually men walking in the top of that. That gives you an idea of how large they are. And then there's, of course, one at night that's caught on fire, malfunctioning and so forth. So let's talk about wind energy and kind of how it works. In Massachusetts, just so you know, they already have energy that is some of the most expensive in the nation. Theirs will cost 23 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, in the South and in the Intermountain West, electricity costs about 8 cents a kilowatt hour. And that's even including the fact that they also have imposed upon them some of the same things that are up in New England as well. So some of those regulations that make things more expensive apply equally. But you can just imagine what this does. Now, you might ask, how in the world do you sell energy that costs 3 times as much? I mean, for example, if I ran a pizza shop and decided that instead of a pizza costing somewhere between $15 and $20, was instead going to cost, say, $50, and it was roughly comparable to a $15 pizza, you would expect that I would go out of business fairly soon, wouldn't you? But the way I'm going to do this, see, because I'm smart, I realize I'm going to get the town council to require everyone in town, under penalty of law, perhaps they'll forfeit their property or we'll levy them or whatever, but we'll make them buy 3 pizzas a month from me. And of course, then I can sell you pizzas for 3 times the price, and that's how they're going to do it. So you and I, employers, businesses, will all pay a lot more for electricity. And just to make it clear, you're not just going to pay more for electricity, you're going to pay more for everything else. You're going to pay more for carrots, you're going to pay more for t-shirts, because everything requires energy to make it, transport it, all that kind of stuff, to run the businesses, and that cost we passed on to you. So you'll get the privilege to pay for this over and over. And of course, the bad news is that this will slow economic growth. So not only will you pay for it at the tax bill and when you go to the grocery store, you're going to pay for it in terms of opportunity. That means there'll be fewer jobs for you and your children. I have 7 children, so that's a big issue for me because I'm a little bit worried. I live in a house that if I had to buy today, I could not afford. And so the question becomes, what opportunities will be available to my children as they come of age and get married and have children and want to buy a home? Will that even be possible? It won't be if there's not opportunity. And that's what this sort of boondoggles kill. Now, this is not the only sort of help that they get. They get a lot more. It's a $2.6 billion project. They cannot obtain their own financing, and let me tell you why. You go to a bank and you have a business plan, you show them your business plan, and then they say, yeah, I'm not going to loan you money for that, I'm sorry. Like if I went to a bank and asked to borrow money to build a pizza parlor, and my business plan said I was going to make money by selling pizzas for $50 a pizza, they'd go, wow, those are going to be some kind of pizzas. What's on them? Oh, you can pretty much get the same thing at Domino's or Papa John's. They're going to go, never mind. And, and that's what's happened. Financiers have determined Cape Wind's business plan is bad, and they're not willing to loan their money and then kiss it goodbye. Unless you'll guarantee the loan so that when the loan goes belly up, they get their money back and you get stuck with the bill. Now that tells you why it's a bad idea, and that tells you why, in fact, these sorts of things are crazy. Because the marketplace does a wonderful job of financing good things. There are malls, there are stadiums, there are some stadiums are paid for by public, but I live in the DC area, and that football stadium was built with private money. Not a dime of local money or government money went into it. And the same thing with all the malls around. I take the kids shopping, the restaurants, all those things were built by people putting their own money at risk. And the truth of the matter is, if this were a good idea, the marketplace would go along with it. The truth of the matter, though, is it gets even worse. they also get huge taxpayer subsidies. So they don't only ask you to guarantee the loan, so when it goes bad, you're paying for it. They also get these ridiculous investment credits and wind production tax credits for the first 10 years. And they equal up to 30% of the total cost of the project. So it's not inconsequential. They're also exempt from a lot of your environmental regulations, which some of the regulations make sense, some of them don't. The question is why is only wind exempted from those? If they're bad rules, then maybe everyone else should be too. Of course, without those tax credits, it would cost even more. So that instead of it being 3 to 4 times expensive, it might be 4 to 5 times as expensive, because those tax credits help them produce it at least a little lower cost than they would otherwise produce it. Even with those benefits, it's still 3 times as expensive. Now, this will give you an example of kind of how nutty this is. Warren Buffett was quoted in the Wall Street Journal as saying, "We get a tax credit if we build a lot of wind farms." His Berkshire Hathaway firm invests in a lot of wind farms. And then he says, that is the only reason to build them. He didn't say that's one of the reasons to build them. It was the only reason to build them was the tax credits. He says they don't make any sense without a tax credit. And that's a businessman. So I think you have to look at that and just scratch your head and go, what in the world is going on? So you end up paying for this boondoggle at least 4 times. One, you pay almost 3 times for electricity. You pay more taxes to cover the subsidies given to wind. You pay more for goods and services because they are also having to pay these higher taxes and higher rates. And of course, that drives unemployment and job opportunity through the floor, which you and your children will also ultimately pay for. Now, they also get other special treatment. Just to be quick on this, oil and gas, they have to pay a substantial sum of money per acre, $205. The federal government only gets a 25 cents per acre fee from wind energy. They also, every single barrel of oil pulled out of the ground, you pay a 13 to 19% royalty. It adds up to over $10 billion. So energy, traditional petroleum energy produces a lot of federal funding. Wind energy gives them 25 cents. So that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Cape Wind is essentially Solyndra. Solyndra received $535 million worth of taxpayer-funded loan guarantees to produce solar panels that cost substantially more than the competition. They weren't special, they didn't do anything any better, they just cost more. And that was all in their business plan, by the way. This wasn't like a surprise, unfortunate event. Their business plan said, we plan to produce these panels at a rate that the marketplace simply cannot bear. Cape Wind is a $2.6 billion project to produce energy that costs too much. So they're very similar is the point. And it's, I think, a real concern that we're just heading down the same stupid energy policy plan. Now, they make these phony green jobs plans or claims. They say Cape Wind will produce about 600 to 1,000 green jobs. Just for the record, I did the math. That makes them each job cost as much as $4.3 million. I don't know about you, but I want one of those jobs. Anyhow, but Solyndra also claimed that it would create about 1,000 jobs. Just for the record, in case anyone wasn't aware, there are 0 jobs today that are Solyndra jobs. And the reason for that is you can't create jobs providing a good and service that is already being provided at 1/3 the cost. If you're not in business, you can't create jobs. So that's the problem with those claims. Now, the other thing too is there's more bad news on this front. We're investing in things that they tell us are green, but these wind turbines are not as green or as clean as they're claimed. The first thing you have to understand is the wind doesn't blow all the time. So when it's not blowing, in many cases, they run diesel-powered turbines. Of course, these wind turbines kill hundreds of thousands of birds every year, and we have a record. We know for a fact they've killed at least 67 bald eagles. Now, that is a pretty amazing thing. The oil companies, if they are accused of killing bald eagles, pay fines that amount to the millions. To date, the wind industry has paid nothing for these sorts of things. So there you see some examples of the energy-friendly and approved of green energy in action. Now, Obama said, of course, that he was planning on having energy rates skyrocket. And did I skip that one? I guess, sorry I did. I'll do wind power and energy first in Europe. This just very quickly. The point is, everyone acts like we can make it work, we can make it work. They've been doing this for decades in Europe, and it hasn't worked there. It's just driven prices up, and they have higher unemployment, they have less opportunity. I don't want us to be adopting European industrial and energy policy. Europe's a mess. It's a wonderful place to visit. I wouldn't want to be 21 years old starting my life hoping to have a lot of opportunity and opportunity to grow in my career there. So anyhow, as I started to say, Barack Obama talked about how energy would necessarily skyrocket with his policies.
Under my plan of a cap and trade system, electricity rates would necessarily skyrocket.
Yeah, that's what I want. Of course, this is, I think, perhaps the one campaign promise Barack Obama is intent on keeping. It kind of makes me nervous, but what he basically does is he regulates and taxes energy that works, and then he gives subsidies and regulatory breaks to energy that does not work. And that's just a foolish policy. Finally, if you look at just very specific, this is something that gets to what we can do about it. Obama's EPA climate plan is designed to require a 30% reduction in existing power plants. The way they are encouraging people to do that, of course, is through wind. So they're doing exactly what I mentioned to you, which is it's like me going to town council and getting them to force everyone to buy my pizzas. They'll use state renewable mandates and the wind production tax credit, which has lapsed, but they're trying to get it revived. It lapsed in December, on midnight, just this past year. Anyhow, this is just this huge stealth tax on Americans. The beauty of it is you don't know the government's taxing you. You just think your electric bill went up. But, and that's the way they like to tax nowadays, because they realize that tax increases are unpopular. So now they do tax increases in a more stealth fashion. And that's all this is. So you pay for all this, and you end up suffering the consequences. Now, I'll be honest, Congress has limited power to stop Obama in the next 2 years, at least to stop him dead in his tracks. Because obviously any legislation they pass will not pass the Senate. Even if we do well in November, which I suspect we will, the president won't sign it. But what they can do is refuse to extend or renew the wind production tax credit. And it expired, as I said already, and it's currently dead, and we need to hold Congress accountable. Now let me just, as I close, explain again one more time why wind energy is not our best play. Wind energy produces exorbitantly expensive energy. It is unreliable, it's intermittent. Thus, it does not reduce the number of power plants we need. We still have to have the same ability, because you can't run a first world superpower economy on energy that works when it's blowing outside. And also, sometimes when it's blowing too much, it doesn't work. You think that'd be great, like when it's going really fast. Those ones that caught on fire, in some cases, it's because the wind's blowing too hard. So if it blows too hard, blows too soft, doesn't work. I don't know about you, but if I want to fix dinner, I hope the stove works. And that would be really helpful to me if it did. But it kills jobs. Of course, it requires taxpayer money to succeed. And in the end, it gets government involved in picking winners and losers. And it ends up picking the wrong winners and the wrong losers. And it discourages energy that works. So I want to encourage you to contact your representatives. And I want you to give them a simple message that, one, you oppose taxpayer loans for wind, taxpayer guaranteed loans. I would argue for most anything. I don't know why we guarantee loans. I mean, businesses every day are built with, based on the strength of their business plan. I think we should also oppose taxpayer subsidies for wind. If Cape Wind were a good idea, the private sector would fund it. And then finally, you should say that you strongly oppose renewing the wind tax credit, wind production tax credit, because it only empowers the EPA to use and impose Obama's climate agenda on us. With that, I want to thank you for being here again. We're going to open it up to question and answer. I would suggest that if you have a question that you go to those mics, because I'm not sure if you shout it out we'll hear. I'll act as moderator, and my companion's eyes will try to answer your questions. But we do appreciate you being here today. These are important issues, and we value the fact that you care enough about your country to be involved. So with that, I see we have someone who wants to ask a question. Go.
Yes, I'm curious as to how the Iron Dome missile defense system relates to the other systems that you mentioned.
There we go. Absolutely, and thank you for that question. Obviously, what's been going on in Israel and Gaza has been a very hot issue, very important issue, a very serious issue as far as these missile threats are concerned. The Iron Dome, I would say, ties in most closely with the Patriot missile system, which I mentioned. As I mentioned, with the Patriot missile system, it's designed for more short to intermediate range threats. It was developed and is now being used in conjunction with several of our allies to respond to these threats, similar to what we've done with the Iron Dome. The Iron Dome was funded both by the United States and Israel and developed jointly between the two countries. And it's a perfect example of how we can work with our allies to basically share the burden of developing these systems and testing these systems. And once we get them to a point where they've been quite successful, such as the Iron Dome, then go ahead and employ them and deploy them with other allies. So that's another perfect example of where we've been able to work with our allies to share the cost burden and the technology burden of developing what have been very successful missile defense systems.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One thing I'll add to that just very quickly is that Israel is about the size of New Jersey. So we couldn't really defend our country as a whole with the same system. They face different risks. They don't face risks from intercontinental ballistic missiles, but the short-term ones. It's important we have that capability too, because when we have our troops somewhere, we want to defend them. So it's mobile, it can do lots of things, but it's, a country the size of the United States does need something even more robust than that. As great as it is, and as much as we need that as well, it's not necessarily the only thing we need. Another question back here, sir.
Our country's Achilles heel is our electrical grid. Are there any government or private enterprises prepared to defend our electrical grid, which could be a catastrophe?
Absolutely, and thank you for bringing that up. The EMP, or electromagnetic pulse, which I think you're referring to, is a very serious threat as well. For those who don't know what an EMP is, basically, when we first started testing nuclear missiles, nuclear bombs back in the 40s and 50s, all the electronics stopped working around the test sites, and it took us a while to figure out, well, what happens is when a nuclear bomb is detonated, it also sends an electro pulse, which we don't feel, it's harmless to humans, but it fries all the circuitry in your electronics. Now, what can be done with a low-yield nuclear weapon, what some people think that the North Koreans are actually working to develop, some of their tests have seen to be duds, but what they could theoretically be is a low-yield weapon that is detonated in the atmosphere above our country, could theoretically send a pulse out large enough to take out a lot of the, not only the electronics, but a lot of our grid, the transformers along the grid that basically allow the power to continue along. Now, one of the scary things about that is that those transformers, for the most part, come from China. And oftentimes there's a lead time that can be months to sometimes years on getting those back. So if our grid were to go down due to a nuclear detonation, which is a possibility depending on the attack, which is one of the reasons why we need to be able to track these long-range threats coming in, It could kill up to 90% of people within a year, some folks have said, because it would take down refrigeration, the ability to transport food from markets into cities, and basically a lot of people would die of starvation or lack of the modern amenities that we get and we're able to bring in from far out, so we don't have to live by, we can live in cities, don't have to live next to the food sources. So thank you for that. That is another serious threat and an interesting part as well.
Let's go right here.
Yes, hi. This is an internet question. Is it possible for whoever controls the internet like this to completely black out countries in terms of their internet capabilities? Is it a strategic kind of defensive thing that is another reason why we should retain the control?
Believe it or not, that capacity already exists. It's already possible for countries to basically block all internet traffic coming into their country. It may be that your question was actually the opposite function. Is it possible for somebody to set it up to where no traffic would go to another country? That's really not the core root functions that we're talking about. The functions that we're talking about, as far as what the United States still has control over, is what's called the root zone file. And it's literally a database that links the DNS system, like names of websites, like my website, ipi.org, is then linked to an IP address, a numerical address. And all the top-level domains, like all the .coms and .orgs and .govs and all, they're all linked to specific IP addresses. And so it's that file. So the concern is not so much that if someone else got control of that file, they would do something nefarious with it. The concern is really more general. That if the United States could no longer hold ICANN accountable, then Brazil, Russia, Argentina will say, well, someone has to hold them accountable, so let's move it to the UN. And then once it moves to the UN, now when we start designing new internet protocols, when we start rolling out IP version 6 and things like that, that they would insist that there be certain backdoors built into that would allow them to have more government control and government filtering. So it's not as direct a threat as what you're indicating. It's more of an indirect threat.
One thing I would add is, you type in, no one here probably does this, but, NewYorkTimes.com. That doesn't get you anywhere. That sends a signal to this file he's talking about, and then it sends you to the website. Because on the internet, the website's just a series of numbers. A series of 3 numbers separated by periods, usually about 12 to 16, something like that. Anyhow, so I guess theoretically, if they had control of that, they could turn off. Like they say, frontiers of freedom. They say mean things about communists, or they say mean things about Putin. We'll just turn them off. They could actually, because you type in ff.org, it doesn't take you anywhere.
Well, actually, as I've been sitting here thinking about it, one of the things that's in that file are country-level domains. So like .tv for Tuvalu, or .us for the US. And so it is conceivable that someone could just disable an entire country-level, top-level domain. It's conceivable someone could do something like that. The other real threat here that I didn't get into because of time is the idea of a bifurcated internet. And this is really sort of the other thing people are concerned about. The thing that Russia or Argentina or Brazil threaten is if you don't turn over control of these systems to a body that's accountable to the UN, we'll just start our own internet. We'll just set up our own domain system and our own domain servers, and we'll basically just bifurcate off of the internet. And that doesn't so much harm us, but that's actually why the internet companies themselves are in favor of surrendering control to ICANN. You would normally think that U.S. corporations would be opposed to something like that. But their greater fear is actually the idea of a bifurcated internet, and all of a sudden Google or Amazon can't get to people in Brazil anymore. Yeah. So that's how the internet companies have essentially been bought off to be in favor of this move, is that they actually think the greater threat to their business models is the idea of a bifurcated internet.
We only have 4 minutes to go. So what I would ask, I see 4 people in line here. How about if all 4 of you very quickly give your question, and then we will try to answer them in rapid succession quickly, and we'll take notes so that we don't skip it. Travis, will you be our... Okay, so let's start with you, and let's go back and forth. Get all 4 of them out.
So in a nutshell, give me the Democrat talking points in favor of turning ICANN over to the UN. Because you really just answered one of the questions, where does industry stand on this issue? So I got that, but just give the overall, in a nutshell, Democrat talking point.
Whether it's wind, whether it's solar, whether it's blocking Keystone, is it time to just say this is all tracking back to global warming and call that what it is, which is just a fraud, a scam, and the position of this party is no. And every regulation that comes up, every mandate that tracks back to that somehow, we just say no, that is the position of this party.
Sir?
Yes. Getting back to the energy problem, what is being done to enlarge our capacity to refine any of the fuel if we do get something like a Keystone pipeline, or we start expanding to offshore drilling? We're going to be able to bring in more crude, but we haven't built a refinery or expanded a refinery in over 30 years.
Yeah. I think it's 73, but it's just
40 years then.
Yeah, it's close to 40 or over 40. Okay, last question.
Yeah, on the solar issue, I just want to make sure that we make our argument on the right principle. You used that great metaphor about the pizza shop in a small town and how one pizza was 3 times as large. In that case, you had private entities competing for sale of pizza. You wouldn't make that argument based on the pizza being bad, coming from that 3 times as expensive shop. Okay, so I'd rather us not make the argument that wind energy is bad, but rather make it on constitutional principles where the government shouldn't be picking winners, because that's exactly how you'd make it in this small town. So we need to stick to our principles, because our principles are going to survive the argument, win or lose, and we can reapply those principles once made in other arguments. And I think the government should not be picking winners. The wind energy is going to change, costs could come down, so we don't need to necessarily earmark wind energy as bad.
Absolutely.
For the indefinite future.
Let me answer that one first, and we'll go back to the other 3 very quickly. Absolutely. Wind per se is not bad. What makes it bad is the government's forcing it down our throats sideways and making us pay ridiculous prices for it. The truth is, I'd be very pro-wind energy if we could be producing it at rates that made it competitive. But it doesn't survive. What Mr. Buffett said is it only makes sense with all the tax credits. That's bad policy. It's not that wind is per se bad. It's that doing stupid things, wasting the taxpayers' money, using the force of compulsion to make you pay for it, bad idea. Okay, let's go quickly to the Democratic talking points. If you can take 30 seconds on that.
Okay, so what are the really intelligent, substantive arguments that Democrats make in favor of doing this? It puts me in sort of an odd position, because there really aren't any. I mean, essentially what Democrats are doing today is just knee-jerk defending their guy. And whatever the Obama administration wants to do, they just knee-jerk defend it and they don't criticize it. Now, let's be honest, we did the same thing when our guy was in the White House. I mean, we screwed up too. I mean, when the Republican in the White House was deciding it's okay to start spying on Americans' internet traffic and all that kind of stuff, we went along with it too. So I think both sides are guilty of this. They're guilty of just knee-jerk defending the policies of their guy whenever he's in the White House. The good news is there are a couple of Democrats who have spoken critically of this. Senator Ron Wyden has spoken critically of this. So there are a couple of Democrats who every once in a while will step outside the line and be critical of the administration. For the most part, they're just sort of knee-jerking, backing their guy.
Okay, and then the last 2 questions were based on energy questions. One was, about global warming being a fraud. There's no question that it's a fraud. The climate changes all the time. There was ice on the ground near D.C. 10,000 years ago. There's not now unless it just snowed. That's global warming. And guess what? Yuppies and SUVs didn't cause it. So on some level, it's always changing. Right now, it's either been static or slightly cooling for the last 15, 20 years. When I was in high school, I remember that they were worried about the coming glaciation. And then just a couple years later, they were worried about global warming. So I think, news flash, weather changes, climate changes. If it's changing kind of like it has in the past, then maybe we ought not freak out about it and demand that we all pay lots of money to save everything. And then the last question was, what are we doing to enlarge refining capacity? I think the answer was in when you said there hadn't been one built in more than 30 years. I think it's closer to 40 now. The answer is we're not doing anything. It's become, it's a self-defeating process when the energy runs our economy. We need to provide energy, and yet we have decided and allowed crazy people to tell us that energy is bad, and therefore we shouldn't, be investing in it. The reality is, if you think energy is bad, then go live in Afghanistan, because that's what a society looks like that has no energy. And I don't see them going over there. So, it's an insane policy. It makes no sense, but it satisfies some people's need to feel like they're making a difference. And that's, unfortunately, they are making a difference. It's just a bad one. Thank you so much. We're going to do our drawing right now for the iPad.
I want to thank Tom, Travis, and George for the presentations. And how many people here are under 12 years of age? Raise your hand. I can't see anybody. Is there not? There's one. All right, come on up. You're going to be the person that does the draw. No? Oh, you're just taking pictures? Okay. All right, where'd you come in from?
Georgia.
Georgia, all right. And what's your name?
Hayes.
Hayes. All right, Hayes, we're gonna shake this up really, really good. And you gotta close your eyes, reach inside.
He can dig around if he wants.
Yep. Okay, let's see, anything on the back side? Nope. What name does that say?
Susan Primrose.
Susan Primrose, are you here? Thank you, congratulations.
Remember, he's from Georgia. He's sitting right over there.
And I'm from Georgia. Okay.
Oh, wow. Georgians. Oh, maybe there was something in the water. Thank you again for coming today. We really appreciate everything.
To the bed asking God, what can I do to make this better? How can I be part of the solution? I just felt crippled with fear and inaction. And I remember every morning I'd fall to my knees in prayer next to the bed, asking God, what can I do to make this better? How can I be part of the solution, not part of the problem? 5 years ago, when my husband and I retired, we had this long-range plan when we first got married to retire after 30 years of work. And it was the McCain-Obama campaign in '08. And I could see that the political winds were favoring Obama, and that was a scary thing. And we had a market crash. And so half of the things that we had saved on paper were now wiped out. So I started to venture over to my local GOP in hopes of finding something to do for the election. And there was really nothing going on there. It was very disheartening. I was just looking for some way to make a difference and do something. Well, I've been a longtime member of the Heritage Foundation. So I was personally contacted by Russ Vogt and Jessica Anderson when Heritage Action was just starting up. And they were looking for activists to write letters to the editor on the Affordable Health Care Act. So I said that I would, and they provided me some wonderful research and talking points to help me craft my letter. I submitted the letter, it was published, and our relationship grew from there. They do the same with each Sentinel. It's a very personal relationship they develop with Sentinels, and that's what separates them from all the other organizations out there that I've tested. There's all these tools in an activist tool chest, and Heritage Action is there to teach activists how to use those tools. Now I look forward to the future because I know that I'm making a difference. As a Sentinel, we have our voices heard individually. And when you add up our team with all the other teams that are growing across this country as Sentinels, we're going to be a force to be reckoned with, and we will be heard in DC and help shape policy and help take our country back to its founding principles.